Think the weirdest military defeat in history involved actual armies with guns and tanks? Think again. Picture this. A fully equipped military force complete with machine guns and experienced soldiers gets absolutely demolished by a bunch of large flightless birds with attitude problems. We're talking about the Great Emu War of 1932, where Australia literally declared war on emus and lost so spectacularly that it became one of the most embarrassing military campaigns ever recorded. Today, we're diving deep into this bizarre chapter of history that proves sometimes nature fights back in the most unexpected ways. This is the story of how thousands of oversized chickens with serious anger issues managed to outsmart, outmaneuver, and utterly humiliate one of the world's most capable military forces. It's a tale so absurd it sounds like satire, but every feathered detail actually happened. 1. Let's set the stage for this avian apocalypse. The year was 1932, and Australia was dealing with the aftermath of World War I and the crushing weight of the Great Depression. Times were tough, but farmers in Western Australia thought they had at least one thing going for them: vast wheat fields stretching as far as the eye could see. These weren't just any farmers either. Many were returned soldiers who had been granted land as part of a soldier settlement scheme, trading their rifles for plows in hopes of building a peaceful life. But nature had other plans. As the wheat began to ripen, an army unlike any other began to mobilize. 20,000 emus, each standing nearly 6 feet tall and weighing up to 130 pounds, started their annual migration from the interior regions toward the coast. These weren't your garden variety birds. Emus are Australia's largest native bird, capable of running at speeds up to 30 miles per hour. And they possess a disturbing intelligence that would soon become painfully apparent to the Australian military. 2. The emu invasion was nothing short of devastating. These feathered marauders descended upon the wheat fields like a plague of biblical proportions. They didn't just eat the crops, they trampled them, destroyed fencing, and left behind a path of agricultural destruction that would make a tornado jealous. The farmers watched helplessly as months of back-breaking labor disappeared down the gullets of these oversized ostriches. But here's where it gets interesting. The emus weren't just randomly wandering around causing chaos. They were organized, almost militaristic in their approach. They moved in coordinated groups, seemed to have scouts that would survey areas before the main force arrived, and displayed tactical awareness that would impress any military strategist. It was as if nature had decided to wage its own war against human civilization. 3. The farmers were desperate. They tried everything conventional wisdom could offer. Scarecrows? The emus ignored them completely, some even using them as convenient perches. Fencing? These birds could jump remarkably high and seemed to take particular pleasure in destroying barriers. Traditional hunting methods proved useless against such massive numbers. The situation was spiraling completely out of control. The financial losses were staggering. We're talking about crops worth thousands of pounds in Depression-era money, which translates to devastating economic impact for communities already struggling to survive. The farmers had fought in the trenches of France and Belgium, survived machine gun fire and poison gas attacks, only to find themselves defeated by a bunch of birds in their own backyard. That's when someone made a decision that would go down in history as either brilliantly innovative or spectacularly stupid. If conventional methods couldn't handle this emu epidemic, then perhaps it was time to call in the military. After all, how hard could it be for trained soldiers with modern weapons to deal with a bunch of oversized chickens? 4. Enter Major Gwynedd Purvis Wyn Aubrey Meredith, a decorated World War I veteran who probably thought he'd seen the worst that warfare could offer. The government officially deployed him along with 2 soldiers, Sergeant S. McMurray and Gunner J. O'Halloran, armed with 2 Lewis machine guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. This wasn't some casual pest control operation. This was a full military deployment with official orders, complete paperwork, and the backing of the Australian government. The plan seemed foolproof on paper. Machine guns versus birds. What could possibly go wrong? The Lewis gun was a proven weapon of war, capable of firing 500 rounds per minute with devastating accuracy. These were the same weapons that had mowed down German infantry charges during the Great War. Surely a few thousand emus would be no match for such firepower. But here's where military confidence met biological reality in the most spectacular way possible. The first engagement took place on November 2nd, 1932. And it immediately became clear that this wasn't going to be the turkey shoot everyone expected. The emus demonstrated an almost supernatural ability to scatter the moment they detected danger, moving with a coordination that suggested they had somehow developed their own military tactics. 5. The first battle was an absolute disaster. Major Meredith and his men set up their machine guns and prepared for what should have been a straightforward extermination operation. Instead, they encountered something that defied all military logic. The emus seemed to have developed reconnaissance capabilities that would make professional scouts jealous. They posted sentries while the main flocks fed, and the moment these feathered lookouts spotted the soldiers, they would emit warning calls that sent the entire group scattering in perfectly coordinated chaos. But it gets worse. When the soldiers did manage to get close enough to open fire, the emus displayed an almost supernatural resilience to bullets. These birds had thick, dense feathers and tough hides that seemed to absorb small arms fire like some kind of biological armor. Soldiers reported hitting emus multiple times only to watch them keep running as if nothing had happened. It was like fighting an enemy that refused to acknowledge the rules of conventional warfare. The machine guns, those instruments of modern military might, proved nearly useless against targets that moved unpredictably and refused to form convenient clusters. Every time the soldiers thought they had a clear shot at a group, the emus would suddenly change direction, split apart, or simply disappear into the landscape with an agility that mocked the heavy, cumbersome nature of military equipment. 6. Day after day, the pattern repeated with increasingly embarrassing results. The emus seemed to be learning from each encounter, developing countermeasures that grew more sophisticated over time. They began avoiding areas where soldiers had been spotted, changed their feeding patterns to become less predictable, and even appeared to be communicating information between different flocks about military positions. Meanwhile, the soldiers were burning through ammunition at an alarming rate with virtually nothing to show for it. Reports indicate that in the first few days of operations, they fired thousands of rounds and killed fewer than a dozen emus. The mathematics of this engagement were becoming increasingly humiliating for what was supposed to be a modern, well-equipped military force. So there you have it, the most ridiculous military campaign in human history. A fully equipped army with machine guns and trained soldiers completely outmaneuvered by a bunch of oversized birds with serious attitude problems. The Great Emu War of 1932 stands as a testament to the fact that sometimes nature has the last laugh. No matter how advanced our weapons or how confident our strategies, Major Meredith and his men eventually withdrew in defeat, having fired thousands of rounds to kill kill maybe a few dozen emus out of 20,000. The farmers went back to dealing with their feathered nemesis through conventional means. The government pretended this embarrassing chapter never happened. And the emus, well, they kept doing exactly what emus do, completely unbothered by humanity's failed attempt to show them who's boss. It's a story that perfectly captures the absurdity of human ambition meeting the unstoppable force of nature. We can build machine guns, deploy armies, and declare official wars. But sometimes a bunch of birds with no respect for military protocol can humble even the mightiest forces. The next time you're feeling overconfident about human superiority over the natural world, just remember the Great Emu War, where Australia's military might was no match for some very determined, very large, very angry birds.